Former world darts champion Ted Hankey has been jailed for 2 years for a sexual assault caught on camera.
The roar that greeted Ted Hankey whenever he stepped out in the black Dracula cape was once the loudest sound in the sport, and today nobody in darts will say his name out loud. The silence is heavier than the cheering ever was. Between those two moments sits a stroke, a CCTV camera, a Crown Court judge, and a young woman whose life was changed forever inside a venue in Crewe. Hankey is not just another darts player who slipped quietly from the spotlight. 2 BDO World titles sit on his record, alongside a tournament where he landed 22 maximums and a world final he closed out with the highest possible checkout in the game. Once upon a time he was box office, he was feared, audiences came specifically to watch him work, and now his name appears on the sex offenders register. This is the dark side of Ted Hankey. Before the conviction, before the cameras turned away, before the sport quietly forgot his name, Ted Hankey ranked among the most theatrical figures the BDO had ever produced, and the nickname came directly from his stage entrance. Walking to the Osh, slow and silent in a long black cape modelled on Dracula, head high and face frozen, he offered no smiles and no waving to the crowd, only that icy stare that prompted commentators to dub him the Count. The name stuck because the persona felt complete, the cape and the stillness and the menace all working together to turn a darts tournament into a horror show audiences could not look away from. January 2000 turned the performance into history. At Lakeside, Hankey steamrollered Ronnie Baxter 6-0 in the BDO World Championship final, sealing the title with a 170 checkout, which is the highest possible finish in a game of darts. 22 maximum 180s landed across the tournament, a record at the time, and his average in the final climbed past 97. The numbers mattered because they proved that the substance underneath the theatre was real. 9 years later, he did it all over again, beating Tony O'Shea 7-6 at the 2009 BDO World Championship in a final that went right to the wire. By that point, the cape had stopped being a gimmick and become his trademark, the symbol every up-and-coming kid wanted to face on television and every veteran wanted to dodge in the early rounds. That was the surface, the version of Ted Hankey the cameras showed. Underneath, the cracks had been forming for years. The on-stage anger arrived first. By 2007, at the International Darts League, observers were already noticing that Hankey muttered insults at crowds whenever his shots missed, and the pattern only deepened from there. During a 2008 BDO World Championship semi-final against Simon Whitlock, he turned to the audience mid-leg and shouted at them to shut up. The complaints became constant. The lighting too bright, the carpet too thick, the darts apparently bent in ways nobody else could see. At a UK Open qualifier, he accused his opponents of fake coughing to throw off his concentration, and that's when the behaviour escalated into kicked sponsor banners, abandoned matches, slammed darts on tabletops, and refused handshakes. For a while, the sport tolerated all of it because champions were allowed eccentricities and Hankey held 2 world titles. The cape, the menace, the volcanic temper, the entire package kept being framed as part of the show. The problem was that none of it had ever been just a show, and the anger underneath was real and it was getting worse. The next thing to fail him was his own body. Around the time he defected from the BDO to the more professionalized PDC circuit in the early 2000s, Hankey suffered a stroke that coverage has described as mild, although mild remains a relative word when the consequences include damaged vision and broken concentration. Diabetes was already draining his energy and making it harder to focus across long matches, and the stroke effectively closed the door on a 3rd world title. At the Grand Slam of darts during this stretch, his television average dropped into the low 60s, which sits well beneath the high 80s and low 90s that professional television darts averages normally occupy. A low 60s average is not the form of a former world champion, it is the form of a player whose body has stopped delivering what his mind keeps asking it for. Hankey kept showing up regardless, kept walking out to the Osh in the Cape, but the magic had drained out of the act and the bookings started thinning. Big tournaments shrank into small tournaments, and the small ones shrank into exhibitions, which is where the story turns dark. In 2021, Hankey attended a darts exhibition event in Crewe, Cheshire, and at that event he sexually assaulted a young woman. The whole thing was captured on CCTV. Those are the bare facts, and they have to be stated plainly because everything afterwards flowed directly from them. There was no he said she said in this case, only footage. When police first questioned him, Hankey reportedly denied any wrongdoing, and that's when officers played him the CCTV. at which point he stopped cooperating with the investigation entirely. The evidence was there on the screen, and there was nowhere left to run. The charge was sexual assault, and Hankey entered a guilty plea to 1 count. Crown Court in the northwest of England heard the case, with proceedings presided over by Judge Stephen Everett. According to coverage of the sentencing hearing, the judge described Hankey's behaviour as disgraceful, telling the court that the defendant would have lied about the assault if the CCTV footage had not existed. The footage was not just evidence of the crime, it was the only reason any accountability happened at all. The court was told what the assault had done to the young woman, and the picture was bleak. Panic attacks set in afterwards, alongside a fear of going out, and she spoke of a deep sense of betrayal because her attacker was a recognizable figure, a public face, someone whose presence at the event had been advertised as entertainment. He was supposed to be the star turn of the night, and instead, he became her assailant. The sentence handed down was a suspended prison term, alongside placement on the sex offenders register, with a notification period reported as 10 years, which is the standard duration under United Kingdom law for the kind of sentence Hankey received. From the moment that order took effect, his name, his address, and his movements all became matters for the police. The 2-time world champion was now something different, a registered sex offender, and would remain one for the next 10 years. A suspended sentence is often misunderstood by people outside the legal system. It is not freedom, and it is not a slap on the wrist. It is a prison sentence hanging permanently above the offender's head. Step out of line during the suspension period, breach any of the conditions, commit any further offence, and the suspended term activates immediately, sending you to prison for the original crime, plus whatever the new one carries. For a man in his 50s, already managing declining health, the suspended sentence functioned as a leash, and the register functioned as the collar. Inside the sport, the reaction was immediate, and it was almost entirely silent. Sponsors dropped him, exhibition organisers cut ties, and the phone stopped ringing. The darts community, which had spent years arguing about whether Hankey's outbursts counted as entertainment or bullying, had nothing left to argue about because no defence was available, no misunderstanding could be invoked, only a guilty plea, a CCTV recording, and a young woman dealing with panic attacks. Not a single prominent player stood up for him publicly. No calls for forgiveness emerged, no tributes to the Cape circulated, no nostalgic specials about the 170 checkout aired, no warm interviews about a road back appeared. The sport simply stopped saying his name. That silence is its own form of judgment. Darts is a sport that genuinely loves a comeback story, whether it is Phil Taylor's longevity at the top, or Eric Bristow's mentorship of Taylor, or the way Andy Fordham was given a final farewell during his ill health. Legends get memorialised in this sport, and Ted Hankey, twice a world champion, has been quietly erased from that memory. The matches still exist on YouTube, the finals still sit in the BDO archive, but the man himself has been written out, and the writing out happened the moment the sentence was handed down. The cost did not stop at the career. According to coverage of the case and its aftermath, Hankey's marriage collapsed, his wife filed for divorce, and his children cut contact entirely. The man who had once walked out in a black cape to roars of theatrical fear had become someone his own family could not stand to be near. The cape had gone, the character had gone, and what remained was a man in his 50s with a stroke behind him, diabetes ongoing, criminal record on file, and nobody left in the room. Looking at a story like this one, the temptation is to ask whether anyone saw it coming, whether the years of on-stage outbursts, the muttering at crowds, the shouting at audiences to shut up, the kicked banners and slammed darts were warnings the sport had chosen to read as eccentricity. The honest answer is that anger on a dart stage is not the same thing as sexual violence in a back corridor. Plenty of players have lost their tempers, plenty have walked off mid-match, plenty have complained about the lights and the carpet, but almost none of them have ended up in Crown Court entering a guilty plea to sexual assault. The on-stage Ted Hankey and the Ted Hankey of Crewe are not the same story, and one does not explain the other. They do share one thread, however, and the thread is contempt. The Count persona was built on contempt from the foundations up. Contempt for the crowd, contempt for the opponent, contempt for the niceties of the sport itself. For most of his career, that contempt was packaged as theatre. The cape made it safe, the Dracula imagery made it a joke, and the world titles made it forgivable. When the cape came off, what was underneath was a man who had spent 30 years being told that his contempt for other people was part of his charm. The 2021 assault was not theatre, it was the same contempt, this time in a place where there was no audience to clap. The current picture is bleak and quiet. Hankey has not come back to professional darts, with no PDC Tour appearance, no WDF resurrection, and no reality television redemption arc. If the 10-year notification period started in 2021, he remains on the register today and will stay there well into the next decade. 2 world titles still sit on the record books and cannot be taken away from him, although they now sit alongside a court file, and the court file is the entry that gets searched first. There is a reason the darts world has stopped telling Ted Hankey stories, and it is not that the stories lack interest. The ending is unbearable. A player who once landed the highest possible checkout in a world final ended his career paying the highest possible cost, after taking something from another person that he had no right to take and being caught on camera doing exactly that. The cape was always part of the show, the anger was always real, and the man inside the costume turned out to be exactly the kind of person his stage character had spent decades pretending to be. That is the dark side of Ted Hankey.